Welcome to the Al-Attiyah Foundation podcast series, where industry experts share their insights on current and urgent energy matters. My name is Naweed Jabakil, and today we're joined by one of the titans of the LNG industry in the United States. Charif Souki is the CEO of Tellurian and the founder of Cheniere Energy. He joins us to discuss how the industry has changed during his long and distinguished career in North America. Welcome, Charif. Let's start then. First things first, I just wanted to begin with a bit more background on the origins of Cheniere Energy. Tell us how the idea came about for the company.
Hi, Naweed, how are you? Cheniere had three phases. First, I wanted to start an exploration company in the Gulf of Mexico. Very quickly, we realized that using the modern technology, seismic imaging that were improving your probability of success, still made it very difficult to find hydrocarbon on a profitable basis. We moved from that to coming to the conclusion that we needed to import natural gas from the rest of the world in the form of LNG. We went through a phase of this where it was a crazy idea, and then Alan Greenspan decided it was a good idea, so the market decided it was a good idea. We were able to start construction, and right as we were riding the crest, the shale revolution started in the United States, and all of a sudden, a well-built plant looked like maybe they were not so well built, and things went dramatically differently. And one day I got a phone call from Aubrey McClendon saying, Charif, can you go in the other direction and export natural gas? Of course, natural gas in the US in those days was $9 an MMBTU. So I said, Aubrey, there's something you're not telling me. And he wouldn't really amplify on this, but very quickly it became clear that we had more gas that we needed in the US, and maybe it made sense to go in the other direction. So we shifted and became potentially an explorer, and that time things went very, very quickly. We applied for our permits in 2010, got them in 2011, started construction in 2012, and the rest of Cheniere is history.
And so there was a business need, by the sounds of it, for how the company came about. Let's shift gear and talk about the new venture then, Tellurian. It's now in a growth stage after being established in 2016. How did that experience with Cheniere help when you with the startup of Tellurian?
Very quickly at Cheniere, not very quickly, it took us 5 years, but eventually we came to the conclusion that having that much of a physical need for gas, to put it in a liquefaction facility of the kind of size that we planned for Sabine Pass and Corpus Christi, and to be able to export that gas, sourcing the gas was going to be an issue. Yes, the market in the US is extremely deep. However, getting the right pipelines, the right of ways in order to source the gas and bring it and be at the mercy of what the domestic market is doing for sourcing your gas presented some challenges. So we started looking seriously at Cheniere, at the possibility of integrating. My largest shareholder, Karen Icahn, and the rest of my board took exception, so decided to terminate me in 2015. I still thought it was a good idea, so with Martin founded Tellurian in 2016 to pursue that vision in terms of an integrated facility based on very cheap resource in the United States that could be put on the water on a very competitive basis. And that's how Tellurian came to be.
And just to pick up on that point of working with others, lots of illustrious careers amongst the board members of Tellurian. Just tell us a bit about the importance as a CEO of attracting the right people for key roles, especially in the LNG industry.
I think as a CEO, which I'm not at Tellurian, but I'm taking the position of an executive chair. But if you are the dumbest person on your executive committee and on your board, you do extremely well. Because getting smarter people than you to do the things that they do well around you is a critical piece of being able to be successful. Nobody can do what we're trying to do by themselves. So it's very, very important to attract the right talent, trust them to do what they do well, and let them go and operate.
And let's talk a bit more about the technical projects you're working on. I know a lot of our listeners will be interested in that. Let's start with the Driftwood project then. I understand construction about to start there and some offtake agreements have already been signed. What's the latest there?
So we have a phenomenal piece of land on a very good body of water that has all the preconditions. We've been doing for 3 years to work with Bechtel and with the regulators in order to get all the permits. As you know, we've worked a lot with Bechtel at Cheniere. I think Bechtel with us was responsible for 10% of the world's liquefaction, always on time, always on budget. So that piece of the puzzle, if you will, we can sort of rely on. It's our foundation. Infrastructure in the US is cheap. We know how to build it, and it turns out that the resource base is also cheap. So we put those pieces together. In the last 3 or 4 months, we signed agreements with Vitol, Gunvor, and Shell that basically represent all of the capacity we have to sell in the first phase of our project, about 9 million tons. Out of 11 that the trains will consist of. So we are now on the side doing the preparation. We're removing some pipelines, enlarging the roads, and we expect Bechtel to start in earnest by the end of the first quarter of next year.
And it's interesting you say that infrastructure is cheap in the United States. A lot of people would think that that wouldn't be a competitive advantage there. Just with the whole climate change agenda in the US and President Biden making it a key policy of his, how much support is there, do you think, in the US for projects like this?
It's mostly a case of necessity, not a case of desire. So everybody has aspiration, and we can agree whether they're going to be realistic or not. But on a long-term basis, I don't see how people can get around an increasing role for natural gas on a global basis, and a variability of the model from being a point-to-point destination rigid type of business to a true commodity market. So I would say out of the total gas production in the world, about 100 BCF a day crosses borders. And of that, 50% does so in pipelines and 50% does so in LNG. And in that context, there are 3 mega players today for the future. Qatar, the US, and Russia. Australia has done what Australia is going to do. I don't think it's going to increase much in the future. But so all the gas that is to be necessary on a long-term basis for the global markets is going to come from those 3 places, or 75% of that.
Yeah, interesting. And just with regards to the Driftwood business model, it's somewhat different to some of the exporting rivals when it comes to LNG. You're not going down the toll processing route, instead looking to secure your own gas supply and pipelines. Why does that make sense?
We want to be fully integrated. We think we can deliver gas to the facility at about $2 if you produce it yourself, and liquefy it for about 75 cents. So you're on the water for $2.75. And you've got the flexibility to sell it to a market that, as I said, is going to be extremely strong for a very long time. I think when you look at the appetite for energy in general and for gas in particular, from non-OECD countries, starting with China and India and Southeast Asia, South America, and even now from Europe, which 3 months ago people would not have believed you, but look at the situation in Europe today. I think regardless of the ESG aspirations, the reality is 80% of world energy is coming from hydrocarbon, and that is not going to change.
Yeah, I think that's a realization for many countries around the world. And looking at after Driftwood, then what are the longer term aspirations for you? I mean, are you considering another LNG plant, maybe moving downstream along the value chain? And you mentioned Europe, obviously a shortage of storage capacity there in Europe and Asia as well. Is that something that you may be eyeing?
I mean, look, we are now focused on phase 1, which is 2 trains with 11 million tons, but the site can support about 27 million tons. So we have our work cut out for us. When we do 27 million tons, we'll start worrying about what else we can. So we've got enough work in front of us now for the next few years.
Yeah, and looking at other players, you mentioned Qatar as one of them, and Russia. Lots of other export plants coming on stream. The QP, Qatar Petroleum, Exxon Mobil, Golden Pass project, for example. Are you worried about oversupply from the United States and what impact that might have on prices?
Not at all. I mean, when you talk about non-OECD country and their aspirations to get to the same living standards as OECD countries, in order to get to that number with the amount of the energy that OECD consumes today, I mean, put it in this context: 15% of the world's population uses 40% of the world's energy, and the rest of the world wants to catch up. And it's very hard to go tell them you're not allowed to catch up. We in America are going to drive Force 150, but you guys have to continue to go on the back of a mule. It doesn't go over. So if you want to catch up the rest of the world to the living standards of Europe and North America, you need 200 million barrels equivalent. So the demand is infinite. The real question is there enough resource on a global basis to really supply that demand? So I don't have any issue in terms of how much competition there is. It's all needed.
That's an interesting take. And if the demand's going to keep on coming, then what can the industry do to try and clean up its act when it comes to methane emissions? You've spoken about the need to counter gas emissions in the US. Do you think other major producers are doing enough to reduce CO2 emissions, methane emissions as well?
Yeah, I don't think it's a matter of what the producer should do or not. It's a matter of what the world is willing to do. It takes a sacrifice. You have to take the basic premise that if you want to discourage something, you have to make it more expensive. If you don't accept that, you have no choice, no chance at achieving your goals. And you're seeing it in Europe now, where for the first time they put a price on carbon that is actually a deterrent for people to use carbon if they can find other solutions. But that has happened only in the last 8 months. And because it was precipitous, look at the results. So if you want to take a position in the US to follow suit, then you have to put a price on carbon. And if you're not willing to do that and accept that attention to climate change and to decarbonization is going to require a more expensive energy, you have no chance of achieving anything. So if you put the right incentives in place, then people can put all of the things that are helpful from a decarbonization standpoint. You can encourage renewables as much as you want. Today, they're 5% of the energy mix. You can take them to 10, 15, or 20% of the energy mix, and it's still not going to make a difference. So on that basis, you have to put the right incentives in place on a global basis and do the things that work tomorrow, not in 30 years. So I'm all in favor of all of this, but it starts with putting a price on carbon.
And just to pick up on that, do you think, I mean, the US is well famous as a consumption economy. Do you think that consumers are willing to pay more if you push that onto them?
Absolutely not. I think every poll shows that if you ask people whether they would be willing to pay 10 cents more at the pump, no matter what the price is, whether it's $2 or $4, the answer is systematically no. So it's going to take enormous political courage to say, well, you don't have a choice, you're going to have to. Because right now, our best-selling car in America gets about 12 miles to the gallon, which is kind of a joke if you're serious about climate change. So start at home before you preach the rest of the world.
And just in terms of the major players in the industry, the IEA, for example, its recent report, the net zero by 2050, calling for an end to fossil fuel investment. I mean, when you look at the players like that saying things like that, how do you feel about that?
I'm sorry, that's not what they said. They said if you want to achieve net zero in 30 years, then you need to stop investments in hydrocarbons today. So the way I read it is we're not going to reach net zero in 30 years because there's not a snowball chance in hell that uh, um, we stop making investments in hydrocarbons. And you're talking on a two completely different levels. You have OECD countries, and particularly within the OECD, Europe and North America, that have environmental aspirations. And that is an existential threat in their minds. And then you have the rest of the world where the existential threat is what is going to happen to my people next week, not in 30 years. Can I feed them? Can I heat them? Can I provide them with electricity? Can they drive cars? So there's a complete disconnect in terms of what is considered existential in the West versus the rest of the world. And since the rest of the world comprises 85% of the world's population, carbon emissions are correlated to two things: number of people, so the growth of population on an annual basis make an impact, and living standards of people. Because as their living standards improves, they want to use more energy. So in that context, I don't see how we get to net zero on the current recipes that are being provided for people. And now I would say, in terms of existential understanding of what is happening and what is existential and what is not, I think Europe has just joined the rest of the world. Because this winter, they're going to be looking at having to curtail electricity delivery and home heating delivery to people in the country. And it's not going to be made at the policy level, it's going to be made in the streets, because people are not going to accept power interruptions and heating interruptions in their homes. So that whole concept of how you deal with climate change has to be rethought.
And it doesn't sound like a very optimistic note then, just a couple of weeks out from the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. Do you think that there's any hope of getting poorer nations and non-OECD players to move along with the agenda that seems to be being proposed by the West to cut rapidly?
If you're honest about the facts, and I think everybody's entitled to an opinion, but nobody's entitled to their own facts. You're going to be in a position in Glasgow to talk about an increase in coal consumption in Europe and in America of 25%. How is that consistent with your concerns about climate? So maybe there's something amiss about the policies that you've adopted so far. And my view is that this was all precipitated by very low commodity prices for the last 6 or 7 years that allow people to be very complacent. So take a grip, rethink about all of these things, understand that if you really want to make a difference, you're going to have to make energy more expensive, and figure out how you do that progressively without creating pain at the local level on the people, both in OECD countries and in non-OECD countries. And the problem is a lot more pressing in non-OECD countries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you travel to those countries and talk to governments there, the pressures they feel seem a world away from some the policymakers in the West, or even businesses in the West do. But I'm just going to, we're quite short on time, so I'll just try and end with something a bit more abstract and philosophical. Based on what we've discussed, then, Charif, what's the future hold, do you think, in the coming decades for LNG, and what's the one thing you'd tell people to watch out for in the industry?
At the moment, I'm concerned that we're not going to have enough for decades. So we're going to have to continue to figure out how to get our friend Saad to accelerate his process, get us in the US to accelerate our process. I mean, the biggest actors today, Leonid in Russia. I mean, this is really what the world is going to hope for. The rest is incidental. You'll add the Papua New Guinea or Mozambique or something like this to the mix, it won't make a big difference. The major effort will come from those three places. And it's needed yesterday. It's not needed in 5 years. But there's no chance we can deliver it in shorter than 5 years. So we're going to have a painful time for the next 5 years. And I'm not quite sure that uh, Russia, Qatar, and the US have enough capability to bring in the second part of the decade to alleviate the problem. So there's a serious rethink of energy policy on a global basis that is necessary. And I think people are starting to feel the urgency, but not quite yet.
Yeah, huge questions still swirling around for the LNG industry. Well, Charif, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I believe I find that these podcasts, usually the ones that fly by, are the ones that often do best, and the time has really gone quickly. On behalf of the Al-Attiyah Foundation, I'd just like to thank you again for joining us for the interview and providing us with the excellent insights, and we look forward to hearing from you again, Charif.
Thank you very much, Naveed.
Thank you. And for our listeners, just to remind you, you can visit the Foundation's website to stay up to date with the latest reports and insights. That's www.abhafoundation.org. And you can follow us on Twitter at Al-Attiyah FNDN. Watch this space for the next Al-Attiyah podcast in the series. I'm Naweed Jabakil. Thank you and goodbye.